we're talking about today what happens when people don't believe you. And maybe some point in your life, you've actually experienced this. And if you have, you know how devastating it can be, especially if you hold yourself to a standard of being honest and being truthful about what you say. You're not the type to gossip or to make things up on other people. And you always presented as a honest, open person who tells the truth, right? And there's something that happens to a person when they're not believed. Ultimately, it is like a huge blow because you want to be able to share certain things, maybe for the safety of others, maybe to get it off your chest. And when people are looking at you with self-doubt and questioning you and maybe interrogating you and making you feel like you're lying, it can be extremely heart-wrenching and hurtful. Because if you've never presented that way, then why would they question you now, right? And so that can be extremely difficult. It can be extremely painful. Makes you wonder if you can even trust anyone, or were they fake friends the whole time, or, your family, especially if you're dealing with, let's say, for instance, an abuse allegation, and you go to your trusted family member and they're not believing you. That can be extremely difficult. And ironically, it's not unusual for parents, especially if you're talking about an abuse allegation, for parents to initially ignore that or to try to sweep it under the rug. Maybe they have a vested interest in that relationship because that is how they are able to survive, right? That is how their children are getting taken care of by their spouse. Hello, welcome, Prana. How are you? Namaste, welcome. So today we're talking about what happens when people don't believe you. There's something that happens to a person when they're not believed. If you've ever been in that scenario, thank you so much. I appreciate it. If you've ever been in that scenario where you've told someone something and they haven't believed you, you know how difficult it can be, right? Yeah, obviously, yeah. It's not a book. It's not a book. So you literally know how difficult it can be, right? To have a scenario where you are trying to express something important to someone and they're not listening to you. Today, guys, welcome. My name is Buffy, if you haven't met me. Today, we're talking about what happens when people don't believe you. And there's something that happens to a person when they're not believed, right? It literally hits them hard, almost like a ton of bricks, especially if what you've disclosed is personal, right? Thank you. I appreciate it. So you can actually have a moment where it literally beats you down, maybe makes you embarrassed, maybe makes you less trusting. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And so it can be a scenario where you've trusted someone with something vulnerable and they're telling you that they don't believe you. And it can be extremely difficult to overcome that because there is kind of an erosion of trust in that moment, right? Because you shared something vulnerable with someone else. Today's topic is what happens when people don't believe you. And so has anyone ever experienced that? Feel free to say a 1 if you have. Welcome. Kayamush. Welcome. And if you've ever had to give someone the news or talk to someone and disclose something that might have been embarrassing, might have been traumatizing, might have been hard to disclose, and then the person literally says, yeah, I don't believe that. I don't want to hear that. Let's not talk about that. We're going to move on forward from that. And especially if it was a trusted adult or if it was a trusted friend, yes, absolute. Peace is very important. And so ultimately, if you feel like you're being dismissed, like what happened to you and your experience wasn't even validated, and you were made to feel like maybe you were making this up by being interrogated, by being essentially belittled. Why would you say this about this certain person? Maybe it was a parent situation. Maybe it was a situation where the person just didn't want to hear it for whatever reason. And oftentimes there are, especially if you're talking about someone's spouse or something like that, it can be extremely difficult to go to a parent and say, I'm having this issue with dad, or I'm having this issue with uncle, or whoever you're having the issue with, and to get them to listen. Because ultimately, there are people, hello, welcome Mark Teixeira. Oftentimes it can be, welcome, my name's Buffy. Today we're talking about what happens when people don't believe you. And I think that oftentimes when people aren't being believed, welcome Percival, when people aren't being believed, they start shutting down. They start shutting down because they wonder, does everyone else have this same opinion of me as this other person? Am I doing the wrong thing? Do people think that I'm lying when I'm actually going through what's actually occurring? And that can be extremely difficult because you shut someone down. I personally have dealt with that and actually tried to help other people to navigate that scenario in which you're trying to tell someone who has, hey, let me know, Prana. You can send me a message on the YouTube YouTube Live. I'll definitely check it out. And so what can generally happen there is that person loses their ability to trust you because you already have shut them down. Absolutely. Already shut them down. And so are they going to come to you again when they have a scenario that is important? Likely not. They are probably going to just keep it to themselves and deal with it themselves, because when they needed you the most, you discarded them. You disregarded how they felt, what they had been through. Rather than just listening to them and trying to give them guidance and tell them that their feelings are valid, you literally treated them like they were the worst human in the world. And that's not how you treat people. Because when people don't believe you, it does something to you internally. You know what? There are a lot of dishonest people. I will agree with you on that. But ultimately, I think that there's a lot of people who are telling the truth, especially about abuse and things like that, being mistreated, unfortunately. And so it can be extremely difficult for people who refuse to see what they want to see. It's almost like willful blindness, right? You know what's happening, you've seen what's happening, but you refuse to acknowledge it because sometimes your mind is not ready to acknowledge what you see with your own eyes. Maybe it's too painful. Maybe you don't want to have to leave your spouse. Maybe you don't want to have to decide between, what to do for your child, which could potentially cause legal issues for another member of your family, right? That can be true, and that can happen, unfortunately. And I do have experience dealing with cases with children, and they're very heartbreaking, especially because a lot of mothers oftentimes have trouble and struggle with believing what their children are telling them about their spouse or their father. And so it's almost like they feel like they have to choose. But being on that end of the situation, if I had that choice, I think I would always choose my children, because your spouse, if they did what is being alleged or what's being said, then you should listen to your children. Why would your children lie about their parent? Because most children love their parents, right? And on the same hand, if it's a scenario where they're talking about something else, maybe a financial thing or some other thing, again, you have to almost look at the evidence before you make up your mind. But there is an idea that keeping an open mind and listening to what someone has to say doesn't cost you anything. And it may actually give you more clarity than cause more issues. And potentially you don't know how bad that situation is until you listen, right? Until you actually go through and figure out what's going on. It may not be as bad as you think. It may be something that can be worked through. It may be something that can be worked through with counseling or any number of things. But ultimately, I think that especially if it's a child who's coming to you, I think you need to be able to say, hey, I've listened to you, I've given you my attention, and I want to hear everything you have to say because it's important to me, right? And I'm listening and I'm here and I will always be here. As I've said to my kids, I said, I will always believe you if you say that something occurred. Let's dive into it together. Let's work through this, because ultimately, as a person who once upon a time was not believed on certain things, I knew how it feels, and I know that can damage a relationship with a parent. It can damage a relationship within the child of themselves, thinking that people aren't going to believe them. People think they're liars. They think that people are making things up. And children ultimately do not have the desire to break things apart, right? Hi, Prana. And so that can be extremely difficult trying to manage at a young age. Like, why does my mom hate me? Why is she not listening to me? Why does my dad hate me? Why does, because they don't fully understand the dynamics of the situation, because they're not adults, they're children. And so children are going to struggle with certain things, just like we all did, and oftentimes too, feeling unseen. To be living in a house and feeling like your parents do not see you has to be one of the loneliest things that can happen to a child. And so if you're ignoring the child, if you're being passive aggressive with them because you're upset with how they're acting, give me the information on that, Prana, for sure. That can feel extremely isolating and sad and almost, destructive to the child, because you're their unit, you're their person, and I think that ultimately adults forget what it's like to be a child at times, because it's been a while for us, right? But we can go back to our life experiences and our family when we were growing up and realize that validation is so important, especially when you're growing, especially when you're little. It is so, so important to acknowledge their struggles, to acknowledge that they're trying, to acknowledge that, I am listening to you. I believe you. I trust you. I feel like you are a good person. And I think that I need to listen to what you're saying. And so ultimately too, let's talk about, I am reviving my Grace and Gavel podcast. And so I did a live on TikTok today about some true crime cases that I had done. One of them is Cindy James. If you've ever heard of Cindy James, she was a nurse from British Columbia. And she actually, there can be. Okay, on Instagram, let me know if you can message me and send it to me for sure. Okay. So the thing about Cindy James is she was a nurse from British Columbia, and she had been having issues that she described as harassment. And so she had said that somebody tied her up and beat her up, that people were stalking her all hours of the night, people were doing all of these things to her, but her own community didn't necessarily believe her. They thought that she might be doing all of these things to herself. Some of the things that she was accused of for herself was like beating herself up, hog tying herself, which the sheriff's department actually said that they believed that she could actually do that. And at certain points, she was seen as disheveled. She was seen as essentially being like out way far away from her home. She had no recollection of how she got there, battered, bruised, all of that. But the community tended to think that likely she was doing this. There was half of the people that believed that maybe she could actually have a person who was actually targeting her. There was the other half who believed that it could have actually been her, because they believed that she was having a psychotic break and that she was doing this to herself, almost like a dissociative identity disorder. And so ultimately, I think a couple of years later, she ended up passing away. Now, the thing with this is no one still knows to this day, this is unexplained, whether or not she committed suicide, because I believe they ruled it a suicide, But other people were saying, but there's all this other evidence. There's all these other things where she would call late at night. The police would come. The police would also do drive-bys. And it seemed that whenever they did drive-bys, like there was no one assault, no one there, no one stalking her or doing any number of things. But ultimately, to Cindy, it's not about what actually happened because, Cindy has passed away, unfortunately, but it's about how people respond. People are going to respond with their own biases, with their own viewpoints, with their own opinions, with their own experiences. And so we all literally carry our own little, kit in our brain of our own viewpoints, right? And it's really difficult to shift people away from those viewpoints because they are hardwired into our neural pathway and into our brain. Some of us are more likely to agree with other people. We're more likely to give people the benefit of the doubt. There's the other camp who's more likely skeptical. They're the people that are like, okay, well, if she didn't do that, then why is she like that? Like, why didn't she this? Why didn't she take a picture of the person? Why didn't she, all these number of questions, because there are people who are very staunchly skeptical about every single thing. For instance, we have people who believe that the earth is flat. That is their viewpoint, right? Fine, that's what they believe. And no one is going to change their mind. No matter what you do, you can present all the evidence in the world, it's not going to change their mind, period. There are people who believe that we never landed on the moon. You are not going to change their mind no matter what you do, no matter what I do, right? And that's okay. People are free to believe what they want to believe. They're free to do what they like, right? But ultimately, it causes a lot of people who feel like they're being dismissed and unseen, a lot of turmoil, a lot of frustration. They likely lose friends. They likely lose sleep. They likely just feel out of it, right? So let's talk about real life connection. Real life connection is extremely important, right? And relationships are what keep us connected as a community, as humans, right? Family, workplace, all those things, all the support. Every person needs support. No man is a village. We are all connected, and the internet has made us a lot more connected. Has anyone else ever felt misunderstood or judged falsely for certain things? I know that a lot of us have dealt with that, and ultimately, you can say yes if you like, or thumbs up, whatever, or me. So I want to say sometimes the hardest part is not what happened, it's how people respond to it. And that is the hardest part. It is actually recovering _perfectionist _mama prana. It's how people respond to it. And so if people are kind and give you the benefit of the doubt, that's one thing. But if people are continuing to mistreat you because they don't agree with you, that's a complete another. And that can be extremely difficult to deal with. The nastiness and the meanness. You can disagree with someone kindly, not for me, but I appreciate it. You don't have to be rude. You can be as nice as possible and say, okay, yeah, I don't really understand. I'm probably not going to ever understand. I'm sorry, but your feelings are valid. And just that little bit of reassurance could make somebody's day, because at least someone took the time to say their feelings are valid, because we can't determine how other people should feel based on what occurred to them. We can't. We oftentimes want to, well, I would have, and I would have fought back, and I would have, I'd have called the police, and I would have done this, and I would have done that. The thing is, none of us know what we're going to do until it happens, right? Until it happens to us, right? And that's the ultimate truth of it. So I want to say thank you all for tuning in. If you liked some of the true crime tie-in as well as the psychological tie-in, I'm thinking about experimenting with that, because I am reviving Grace and Gavel, where truth meets compassion. I haven't done it for a while. I'm focusing on recovering perfectionist mama first, but I want to get back into my legal analysis and true crime channel. So feel free to check it out if you like. It's on this platform, Grace & Gavel. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. And I'm going to check your message, Prana. Have a great day. Bye-bye.